Hello again. Welcome to the training for the second workshop in the Science Fair Workshop Training Series, and this presentation is about developing a research question. I am going to include discussion of the activity in this video, unlike the last one where we had a separate video, mostly because this activity is pretty simple and yet complicated. So, developing a research question. First, this presentation starts out with a review of the previous presentation, and it's up to you how much time you want to spend on this, or if you just want to skip it altogether. If you feel like your kids have got it and they don't need a review, then by all means just blow through this. This is a quick overview of all the components of the scientific method. I am just going to roll right through them because we just covered this in our last training video. It's a little joke about candy. So the heart of this presentation has to do with developing good research questions, and we've basically developed these 5 sort of tests for how to determine if your question is a good question, if it's a doable question. So you can basically take any question a kid has that they want to make into a science fair project, subject it to these questions, and determine whether it's good or whether it needs some refinement or whether it's just simply not doable, which some kids come up with questions that really just aren't doable within our means or at all. So the first one has to do with measurement. Obviously, if you can't find a way to measure what you're looking at with your question, then you can't answer the question. And it's important to spend a little time with the kids talking about what different kinds of measurement there are, because they will get hung up on something like length, partially because that's what, human brains tend to think of in English, at least, when we say the word measure. And also I've thrown a picture of a tape measure up here. But you want to step a little bit outside that and talk about all the different ways there are to measure, both quantitatively with numbers and qualitatively with words and feelings and expressions. And those are fine. It does not all have to be numbers. And you can also convert those things into numbers. So examples of ways we can measure, they do include distance, they include time, they include temperature, they include counting the number of things, but they also include more subjective assessments like smell, like how things feel. A student may be doing a project, sort of classic one I give is the idea of stinky socks. They could do a project determining what makes socks the stinkiest or what makes stinky socks not stink. And how you would evaluate that was that you would have some sort of judge who would smell the socks and rate their relative stinkiness. Now, they could put that on a number scale or they could put it on a word scale. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever serves their project. They just need to have in mind an idea of how they're going to measure their experiment. That's really the most important first step. If you can't think of a way that you can reasonably measure something, then you can't answer the research question. This is a really good time to practice your back and forth with your classroom, brainstorming together. So instead of telling them the different ways they can measure, ask them the different ways they can measure and prompt them to think of different ways that they could measure. And it's a nice way to get the class involved and get them thinking more deeply about measurement. So another really important question is, how long will the experiment take? If it's 2 weeks until the science fair and they want to do an activity with growing plants, that's probably not enough time to germinate, get set up, germinate their seeds, and go. And planning time includes not just the time for the data collection itself, but the planning time, any building and setup, acquiring your materials, data collection, and then putting together your presentation afterwards, because that can take, to do a good job on your presentation can take longer than you think it will. You don't want to just sort of scribble some things on pencil and tape them to a board. You want it to look nice and be readable. So they need to factor in all those questions. If it's 2 months from the fair, then they can do a much longer, more robust project. If not, they need to be thinking something a little bit more compact. What materials will you need for your project? Are they all things you can easily get your hands on? What barriers are there to getting some materials? Is it something you don't have access to? That might be a problem, or it might cost more than you can afford. That might also be a problem. So think really carefully about what you'll need. It may be measurable, you may have enough time, but you may not have the equipment you need. Now, that being said, we do have minor equipment that Spice is happy to loan out. If they need to borrow a microscope, we have those. If they need to borrow things like flashlights, we have those. And in the case of kids who just don't have a lot of money to spend on the project, we do the best that we can to provide consumable type supplies. We have a pretty good closet full of different kinds of consumable supplies, and teachers often have extra craft supplies lying around. So we try to help out wherever we can. When it comes to loaning out equipment like microscopes, we do prefer that they stay in the classroom under the supervision of a teacher rather than going home. But smaller stuff like flashlights, that's fine if they go home. We usually get them back. Really important question. Is your research question interesting? If you're not particularly engaged by your research question, why would you want to do a science fair project about it? Now, a lot of us, we're scientists, we think everything is interesting, but it's really important for little kids to be excited about their science fair projects, because that's really the core of our program, is developing excitement in children for science to get them really motivated and interested in learning. So if they've got a boring research question, encourage them to come up with something that's more in line with their interests, because we don't want them just slogging through a task because they feel like they have to and that science is boring, because it isn't. And of course, a very important question, is your project safe? So you may have answered all those other questions affirmatively, no problem, but maybe your project involves climbing up on the roof and dropping things off. That might not be the safest thing ever, but look at ways that you can make the project safe. So if it involves climbing up on the roof and throwing things off, is there an adult you can get to climb up on the roof for you and drop things? Can you tape off the splatter zone around the drop zone and make sure that no one gets hurt? Just thinking carefully about how our projects are working, what are the moving parts, and what are ways in which we might be endangering ourselves, and seeing if we can fix those. If something can't be made safe, then you shouldn't do it. So those are the 5 questions for developing a good research question. And the next part of the presentation actually goes on to putting those to the test. So we give 3 examples of projects and put them to these tests. And the context I like to provide is that as scientists, we always work in teams. Scientists don't work on their own, alone, coming up with all the solutions to everything. This is kind of the image we have as scientists, but it's not true. We always work in teams. We always bounce our ideas off of one another, and it makes our science better. So here in the class today, during this project, we're going to work as a team to try and pick a project that's going to work well for us. So the first project idea, this is totally this is a gimme. Lava love. So what's the fastest way to cool off lava? Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? I'm excited. The kids will be excited. So, first question about lava love. How will we measure our question? And again, this is a good stage to go back and forth with the students. Now, some of them may be like, oh, we can't do that. But we could. I mean, they make temperature probes for going in lava, or those little heat guns. You can just point at things and it'll tell you how hot they are. So it's doable. There may be some other complications, but I know that people have measured the temperature of lava, so that's doable. How long will our project take? Again, here, back and forth with the students. What do you think? Where do you think we can get some lava? Should we go to the lava, or should the lava come to us? Now, me personally, the only place I know of that routinely has lava available reliably is Hawaii. That might be fun if we could fundraise and get a flight to Hawaii. Who knows? But that might put a cramp in finishing our project in time for the science fair. What materials will we need? Well, lava, something to measure the temperature with, probably those foil-looking suits that volcanologists use when they go to hang out near lava, stuff like that. Okay. Is it an interesting project? Oh yeah, lava's cool. Lava's super interesting. I don't think anybody would think that it's not interesting to explore how lava works. Is it safe? Well, I'm going to guess that putting a bunch of students in the path of lava is probably not safe. And you can have fun with the class here, and you can just be like, is it safe? And let them, they'll all shout out no, except you might have some smart Alex who say, totally. And you're like, yeah, I don't think you're looking out for me there. So there are some problems with that project, though it is pretty cool. So project 2 is Cool Cola. What's the fastest way to cool off a can of soda? So how will we measure the question? Pretty much the same as the last one. We need some sort of thermometer. Probably that's not too hard. We can do that. How long will it take? Well, it takes a couple hours to cool off soda in the fridge. I can't imagine it would take much longer using other methods we might use. What materials will we need? We'll probably want some ice, water, refrigerator. Maybe if we're getting fancy, we could try a CO2 fire extinguisher. Is it interesting? I don't find this project particularly interesting because I cool off soda all the time. I just stick it in the fridge and wait. Is it safe? Yeah, it's perfectly safe and fine. I mean, if you want to do the CO2 fire extinguisher thing, that you probably need an adult to help with because those get pretty cold. But overall, it's a pretty safe project. but I'm not in love with that project. So this is the third project, and this is really the gimme. This is the in between the two. It's not as exciting as lava, but it's definitely more exciting than cooling off cola, which is how do you get the highest geyser with Mentos and Coke? And, make sure to ask the kids, you guys know what Mentos and Coke does? And, mostly they'll know. And you can describe it if they don't. But the picture kind of shows it all. So how will we measure our question? There's lots of different ways you could actually go about measuring the height of the geyser. You can talk back and forth with the class and have them problem solve with it. My favorite is to actually put it next to a wall and mark heights on the wall and videotape the whole thing. But you could have somebody stand nearby and hold their hand up to the height that the geyser went. That might be problematic if the geyser goes really high. But there's lots of different ways to measure it. But basically it's going to involve a tape measure of some sort. How long will the project take? Well, Mentos and Coke are everywhere. It shouldn't take very long to collect up your supplies, set up your setup, and collect the data. You should be able to do this one in a weekend, no problem. Although, if you want to do it really well, you might take it longer while you work on your trying different nozzles to get the height up, or if you're measuring different amounts of Mentos and Coke, that would be a little faster. So it could take longer, but if you were in a hurry, you could do this one pretty quickly. What materials will we need? Well, we'll need Mentos, and we'll need Coke, and we'll need some way to measure it all. But that's pretty doable. Is it interesting? Oh yeah, Mentos and Coke is super fun, and coming up with ways to try and make your geysers higher, that's pretty fun too. I know, because I've done it. Is it safe? Sure, it's safe. Just don't get soda all over your living room, and then it might not be safe because your parents might chase you out of the house and down the street screaming about soda all over the living room, but otherwise you're pretty good. So, which project should we pick? And you can have some fun with the group. And it's like, how many people think we should do lava? Put your hands up. How many people think we should do cola? Put your hands up. How many people think we should do Mentos and Coke? And mostly they'll go for Mentos and Coke, but you might have some smart Alex in your audience. They may go lava, and that's fine. Have fun with it. So I don't think you guys have my best interest in heart. You want to burn me in lava. I see how it is. Have fun with your group. So that's the core of the present-y bit of this presentation. You can see that there's a lot more here on the slides, but the key bit to cover are those first two clouds with the research questions and doing the practice pick a question, and then this activity. If you get through this activity, then you're good. You've done enough. If you have more time to go over the rest of the presentation, that's great. So this activity is making paper airplanes, and it's using paper airplanes to help us think about how to design research questions. And so we give them this question, and the question is, what makes the best paper airplane? And of course, right away, you're thinking to yourself, well, that's not a very good question, because best is highly subjective. What you think is best and what I think is best are probably two different things. So we want to think about how do we make this question better? And that's going to involve getting much more specific about what we mean by best. Do we mean plane that flies the farthest? Do we mean the plane that is the most stable? The plane that stays in the air the longest? The plane that does the most tricks or loop-de-loops? So we need to make a specific question about airplanes. So that's what they're going to do, and these are the supplies they're going to have. So they're going to have access to different sizes, colors, weights of paper, paper clips, and a tape measure to measure distance. We also do have stopwatches, or you can use timers on your phones if they want to do things like that. So knowing what supplies they have, there's a worksheet that you will give them. It's a very simple worksheet. They need to come up with what their question is. Do they want to measure the plane that goes the farthest? And if so, what do they want to change in that? That's typically the most common question, is what goes the farthest. It's the easiest to do. But they can also go about measuring that in different ways, or at least what they're measuring in different ways. So they can look at how the fold of the plane affects distance. So they could all use the same paper. Each kid in the group folds a plane with a different style and see which goes the farthest, or they could all fold the same style of plane and use different kinds of paper and see how the paper affects it. They could also try different throwing techniques. There's actually an infinite number of permutations you can do on this activity. Also, if they want to look at how long it stays in the air, then you need to use the stopwatch. Or fastest, you need both distance and time to determine what's the fastest. So it's a fun activity. So you give them the worksheet, you tell them what they're going to have access to. They need to figure out what their question is and how they're going to measure it. And then once they do that, they check in with you. Once you've cleared their question and their method, then you give them the supplies that they need to do that. And logistically, for actually carrying out this activity, there's a lot of different approaches. So you can do an all-at-once launch. You can be like, okay, once everybody's got their planes done, we're going to go outside on the playground and throw them all at once and measure them. Or you can do in waves as they get done. They can go to wherever the launch area is and launch in waves. It depends on what you guys will have a better feel for your classroom after the first workshop, how you and your partner work, what you want to do. You can split up with one of you assisting the students in their process and one of you monitoring the launch area, or you can also do them in waves at the end. Has been a very successful technique. Like you call up a group in front of the classroom and everybody counts down 3, 2, 1, and they launch and you measure and they go back down and the next group comes up. So it depends on the time and what your technique is. Different techniques work better depending on the age and just character of the group. One really important thing before you pass out the supplies, though, is I'm a real stickler about this, is that there will be no paper airplane throwing except in the launch zone. If you throw your paper airplane before you are cleared, your paper airplane will be confiscated. So there's no just throwing paper airplanes around the classroom. When they're done throwing, if there's time, you can send them back to try some tweaks and try it over again. Or you can take their planes and give them to the teacher. And this is what I do. I tell them to make sure to write their name on their plane. And at the end of the activity, you collect them all up and give them to the teacher so they can have their planes back at the end of the day. And your teacher will thank you for that because they do not want those kids having airplanes in the classroom. So those are a couple of little things. Other things to keep in mind is to talk with them a little bit about control, about things like, so what happens if we, 3 different people are throwing the planes, we all kind of throw differently. How might that affect things? What are some things that we could do to control that? Now, you could have the same person throw all of the planes for a group, but that's not really fun because then only one person gets to throw the planes. You could have them all throw all of the planes and average the distances. You could let people do practice throws. I usually do let them do multiple throws and just take the throw that has the best result, but some of them will want to average because they've learned how to average and they really like that. So get them thinking about the logistics of the experiment, and we'll come back to this even more in the next presentation, talking about control variables and whatnot. So this is a really fun activity, but it can be chaotic, so you want to set up as much as possible the rules for how, what you expect their behavior to be and how the activity is going to go so they know what to expect and, what they're supposed to do at different points. And you can always use that Science Rocks to focus them back. So if you still have time after you complete your airplane activity, there's more to this presentation where you can just go over what you just did. So what did we learn about science questions? They need to be specific. You need to have ways to measure them, all that good stuff. So be specific. The best paper airplane can mean a lot of things to different people, so we should really clarify what we mean with our questions. Think about what's important to you. There's no point in answering a question if it isn't a fun idea. How will you measure what you're going to do? Because if you can't answer that, you really can't answer your research question. You don't have an outcome. And then talk about their research questions. So if you have plenty of time, you can actually have them sit down and write out a couple of ideas for a science project, and then you can actually have them in their small groups review their questions, or you can do it out with the whole class. You can ask a few kids who are comfortable in doing so to read their questions out to the class, and then have the class provide feedback on what that question is going to entail, and if it's if it needs a little refinement, if it's doable. Questions at the end. Give them a little homework if you have time, again, to start thinking about how they will go about collecting data for their research question. And of course, very end, don't forget, Science Rocks. So that's the whole presentation. Now, if you find yourself with more time in this presentation or later on, over in this window here, it's not linked on the path, but there's a whole section on research conduct and ethics, which covers like responsible use of animals, human subjects, academic integrity, plagiarism, all that good stuff, and encouraging them to, be thoughtful and use their best judgment. I have to update this link. This is an old link. But we do have this information on the website. So that's the whole, watch it go. That's the whole presentation for workshop 2 with the activity. Do make sure to spend some time talking with your partner about how you want to handle the paper airplane situation. It's a very fun activity, though. The kids always enjoy it. But shockingly, fourth grade and below, a good number of the students won't know how to fold paper airplanes, so you may have to show them how to do some paper airplane folding. We do have instructions. For kids who want to try some more advanced stuff, we do have some instructions for really cool paper airplanes that they can design, and they are ranked by difficulty, so there's some like 1 through 4 difficulty planes. So if they're feeling like a little challenge, you can give them one of the 2s or the 3s. The 4s might be a bit much for the time that we have available. All right, we'll see you again in the next workshop. Thanks a lot.